Slimon, who's one of the trio, the three of us who've been working together these past 3 years, who's going to talk to us about institutional support for the AI-bilingual professional. Jason Slimon.
Thanks, everybody. And a little bit more about me to kind of situate things. I got my PhD from the University of Kansas in curriculum and teaching. So I'm much more focused on, TESOL, EMI, CLIL, teacher training, even kind of a nuts and bolts guy. So somehow Scott cajoled me into going with policy stuff more. So, it's not my area really, but I'm going to just lay out some stuff today that maybe spurs discussion. I may be skipping over some of these slides that may be less interesting or less applicable. But I've written EMI here, though honestly, the kind of frameworks, especially at the beginning I'm going to be talking about, are more both Taiwan specific and CLIL in origin. So content and language integrated learning, which kind of forms maybe the foundation for what most of us do at the university level with full EMI programs. But the idea, K through 12 schools are much more, have integrated goals for both content mastery and language skills, some kind of balance there in a CLIL program. But I do think some of the things I'm going to talk about can also be applied, that should be thought about applying to a full EMI program as well. Does everybody have a handout? I think I gave everybody a handout. I like to jot little notes down while the speaker's talking sometimes, and on the page that they're on for my notes, so we can talk about it more easily later. In any case, kind of three big structural stresses on an EMI or even a CLIL educator. Cognitive and linguistic overload. One of the big people in that area is Macaro. We actually had him in our DAE conference during the pandemic, I think 4 years ago, of course remotely, which was great. He's a great guy. But the idea that teachers and students lack necessary L2 proficiency, and I think often we focus so much on students that we don't focus that much on teachers. But really, at universities in Taiwan, there aren't enough native English-speaking professors to teach all the EMI, especially now with the Bilingual 2030 program in Taiwan, which is kind of also how I'm situating this talk today. Those lofty goals, English and Chinese, high levels of skills by the end of the decade. And when we try to fit that into education and the curriculum, we run into messiness and problems from both a student and an instructor perspective there. So you have that stress working on this crumbling column in the middle. Poor teacher. One size fits all fallacy. The idea, strict English-only quotas that ignore contextual classroom, realities that most teachers face, and probably is something that restricts the number of EMI teachers overall. I mean, I know in our university, trying to get enough EMI teachers who can teach content courses. Going to departments where the teacher is traditionally taught in Chinese is an absolute master of business or accounting or law or whatever, and then is okay, you can just teach it in English, and oh my God, I have a full schedule. Why the hell do I want to do that? No thanks, right? So if it was a more flexible structure here and getting past this one-size-fits-all fallacy, maybe it could also be more inclusive and more desirable. And pedagogical isolation. Teachers are forced to navigate complex bilingual transitions alone, leading to high anxiety and burnout. And I would say this one is a huge problem in my very own department. We're like on little islands by ourselves. And so if we can break this isolation, not only does that help us feel better and more confident and probably be more better teachers, it should filter down to our students as well and avoid, as it says, high anxiety and burnout. So now we get to adding AI to the mix, and it may, from some points of view, accelerate this crisis or these pressures that I talked about previously. Usage policy gap, I got a couple numbers here, not as many as Scott, but a couple. I did draw these from sources that were Scott's sources too, though. 68% of students use generative AI weekly. I actually think that might be low for our students in the English department. 15% of SOBI offer explicit guidance. I guess those numbers are accurate. I didn't double check them, but it probably sounds pretty accurate to me. So I think there are two issues here actually. Besides the kind of reactive policing or that surveillance idea that Scott was touching on earlier, you also have the no police or a complete lack of a policy in place at all for guidance, and that could be just as big of a problem, I think. And missed opportunities over here, treating AI purely as a threat or this big inscrutable construct that they don't really know what to do, don't know how to handle. Yeah.
I'm just going to ask, with the explicit guidance, are you going to go into a little bit more like what explicit guidance would be?
I can. I mean, I have more stuff available
Just
here.
at some point,
Yeah, but we can get to a discussion maybe if you want to. I thought I'd just give you the big picture here. So this is what I would say. We leave it to individual instructors working in isolation. You get probably what you get in my department. So we're not just talking about CLIL, we're not just talking about K through 12 programs. I think we're talking about EMI at the university level as well, where, as again I said, we're kind of working as little islands, individual islands. What do we get when you simply kind of layer AI on top of everything else teachers are expected to do? Well, you get this scattershot approach where some teachers are doing nothing, right? They're doing what they have always done, while the department as a whole is giving lip service to the idea that AI is vitally important. And then you get some teachers who are taking that vitally important idea and they're introducing 6, 7, 8, 10 different AI tools as if they're all equally useful and usable and productive. And then you get some teachers who do more like me, who try to pick and choose, and we want to go in kind of one basic direction, and we think that will help students avoid confusion and maybe paralysis even, because I think sometimes it's happening in our department. And if you have that scattershot approach, it's complete chaos. It's just complete chaos. The idea that we have been tasked as our department several years ago after ChatGPT dropped, we were originally being tasked with being the forefront of English language AI integration into the curriculum. Okay, so to survive this bilingual transition, we must fundamentally re-engineer our administrative posture. That's a paraphrase. Dr. Scott Summers. So the idea, we have this idea of I was going to show you what this is all based on, and I totally forgot to do that. So let me go back. The policy shelter comes from Professor Tzu-Bin at Taiwan National Taiwan Normal University, Shida, and he actually formulated this. It's the fertile construct, based on, it's his response to basically the bilingual 2030 policy mandates and how to make those top-down kind of mandates actually workable for K through 12 programs and teachers that might be fundamentally very different from each other. We have the idea of flexibility, being able to adapt the curriculum for specific proficiency levels of students, specific contexts, in environments, creating language-rich or bilingual campus conditions. Roles, okay, clearly defining roles for teachers as well as admin, content teachers, language teachers. We're talking about CLIL, and we're talking about collaborations. Time for those kind of collaborations to take place. And much more kind of what Lynn was interested in later pursuing and fleshing out, the I and the L, instruction and the literacy, and what we're interested in probably the most when we talk about integrating AI into the curriculum, the actual instruction and literacy, both in the language and AI literacy and fluency, and finally evaluations, which we've already kind of touched on a little bit in the discussions earlier. We can talk about that more as well. But the policy, shelter, and the bilingual professional learning communities and sharing communities I'm going to talk about all kind of come out of Lynn and this framework that he created for Taiwan, specifically in CLIL programs also. So the idea, policy shelter, I kind of like, some of these graphics, it's, I get a mixed response, but the idea that we're trying to grow this kind of tree here, this sort of, trying to grow, trying to stick roots down and forming a protective shell over it. So trying to, block mandates and quotas, and then sometimes the negative effects of those. Strict. Yeah, sometimes still AI programs have trouble with text and treating it as graphics rather than actual text. Strict compliance, surveillance, that idea. The idea we should be tolerating friction. These kind of changes, these kind of massive changes that the bilingual 2030 policy has really forced upon education in Taiwan. The idea that it's going to be a smooth transition, a smooth process is just silliness. So the idea, a tolerance for friction, it's going to be messy, it's going to be nonlinear, and if we want to really, truly transition to a bilingual framework. And over here, beyond the surveillance state, strict monitoring, creating a flexible, supportive environment. And like I said earlier, in response to Paul, I can get into more details about what those kind of specifics are in this. Okay. So again, dismantling these strict administrative mandates. The bridge, we had the bridge idea already, that graphic image, which Notebook LN loves. It also seems to love this crumbling rock motif, which is interesting. The all or nothing, the very restricted thing that doesn't allow for these pressures and reacting and adapting to the pressures. So instead, we get this kind of weird starfish kind of outer space kind of celestial body here, which, okay, all right. But the idea being that it's flexible, it can respond, it can react, it isn't crushed, and it can take a beating and still be flexible and adaptive. So it should include things like L1 translanguaging. We're talking about local Taiwanese teachers, preventing, impacts on student learning and the kind of cognitive overload that we talked about before, that I mentioned before. Things like this can help respond to that. Strategic scaffolding and translanguaging. And we talk about, we'll get to how AI can help with this. this one. It's very simple. Graphic image here. So, you know, this policy shelter that forms a defensive line and a good foundation to build upon. And we have one pillar over here, the human infrastructure, and we'll talk about that in just a minute. The bilingual professional learning communities idea. And on this side, I'll get to building upon what Scott was talking about earlier, the AHA framework and pedagogical integration of AI a little bit. All right. So the human engine here is, and the support that's necessary for it in the EMI or CLIL context is building the human infrastructure and supporting the human infrastructure. So the idea, active funding and protection. Okay. So the administrative role there. Resource distribution. Okay. Sharing successful content-tested lesson plans. Okay. Across departments. Okay. So interdisciplinary. And that's something, again, not even at the tertiary level is done very well, I have to say. Well, there's no number 3. I guess that was supposed to be number 3. Thank you, Local Government. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Mediation and trust here. There could be disagreements. Again, people who are willing to adopt and adapt more quickly to those who are not. Mediating disagreements, fostering trust at the workplace, which is often lacking. So, policy shelter builds consensus, replacing fragmented individual efforts with coherent institutional direction. That's the idea. Not sold on this graphical image, but in any case, I do think these two comments down here are important. Identify willing teachers. Again, Scott talked about that. Some are going to be unwilling. And handling that in a flexible, adaptable, and in some cases, accepting way. A unified and coherent strategy rather than just leaving instructors on our own little islands. And the AI pivot here. Institutions championing frameworks to empower students to use AI as an L2 bridge. So using it as a strength rather than as some kind of layer that's just tossed on the top. And getting it to overcome a lot of those cognitive overload problems that I talked about earlier. And I like that idea of cognitive resilience that one of our colleagues in Taiwan wrote about in a LinkedIn post based on some other work that researchers have done in the last year. That's Nigel Daly. It's Nigel. Yeah, so I like that idea of cognitive resilience is an ultimate idea for creating for our students. So, again, ultimate goals. Bilingual professional. So, as Scott said before, this is just a rephrasing of what he said. Operating at a high English proficiency, but also exercising real agency over those AI tools. And the bridge, okay, the idea of things like summarizing, simplifying, translating as necessary, complex L1 concepts into L2 for academic English, something that both teachers and students can do. And I don't like to just limit this to teachers and myself when I do training. I try to get teachers, open this up to your students. If we really are serious about lifelong learning, once students graduate from college, that's it, shouldn't be. And the augmented human agency framework, and we've got our capstone here, locus of agency, every stage controlled by the learner, actively, theoretically grounded model for AI integration into these contexts that Scott was talking about earlier. And we do need to address the central risk of EMI plus AI that we've touched on already, right? passive consumers of generated output. And maybe that's also another reason that we're talking about starting at the middle level, the K through 12. And hopefully, if it's done right, by the time we get up to our level, we won't have even any, this kind of issue to such a degree of knowledge as garbage or offloading thinking processes by the time students reach us in the future. And here we go with progression of human agency. So again, like Scott pointed out, moving from managers, co-creators, and reflective critics. And I'll just read through this really quickly. Administrative posture. I'll just talk about the sheltered modern paradigm. You can compare it yourselves here. Flexible, friction tolerance, protecting risk-taking, because again, everybody is experimenting to a great degree, as we also talk about. Protected, funded, and mediated bilingual professional learning communities for faculty support, technology policy, EHA framework, and cultivating AI-Bilingual professionals. Don't like this so well. This is messy, busy. Skip past there. So I'll end with this, and if we want to talk a little bit more about, ELCs specifically, we can do that during the chat. But this is a quote that I added myself to this last page here. Yeah, I'll let you read it yourselves. That's the goal. Is it lofty? Sure it is, but I don't think it's impossible to reach. So we're trying to empower our students and empower professional teachers. And references down here. That's it. Thank you. Okay, questions?
Yeah. This may be off the topic. We were talking about competent teachers and self-confident teachers. Both of my co-teachers are super confident, competent. One of them is doing CLIO. She's doing half and half English. She's getting instructions in English and translating a little bit. The other one could. But the kids don't have any self-confidence. So it's not a teacher's incapability, it's the student's it's the student's self-confidence that inhibits the teacher. Because the teacher very much could teach, in CLIO, but the students, maybe it's off the topic or something.
Not necessarily, not really. I mean, I don't know. I would. My first suggestion would be start small and build. Start with teaching mostly in Chinese, using a few key, Chinese,
Well, she
key
could
English
teach,
words.
that teacher could teach in English, half and half. Just like the other teacher does half and half.
Well, maybe half and half
half and half.
is too much for the students at that point.
Well,
And that's what I mean when we talk about adaptability and flexibility.
okay.
Start smaller than that.
School policy. I mean, when you're talking about Japan, we have generally transitionary stages. So again, first grade is very different than 8th grade, and it's it's flexible, but generally a school policy. So you might start with 90-10, 80-20, 30. As you go up, the languages will switch in preference. So again, part of it is if the students have some trouble, is it because their parents put them into the system and said, swim?
Oh, this you're asking, I don't want to answer this way, but I'm going to. Blue-collar people hear word X.
Yes.
It doesn't matter if we're both speaking English, both speaking Chinese. Blue-collar worker hears word X, white-collar word white-collar person hears the same word X. And something is different is going on in the minds of the blue-collar person from the white-collar person. Same language, they're both fluent, but the blue-collar brain processes the word different than the white-collar guy processes the word. All of our teachers are white-collar people.
Yes, yes, yes.
Students come from blue-collar homes, and some of the white-collar explanations just don't match with what the blue-collar
Obviously you gotta train blue-collar teachers.
I'm blue-collar. I'm blue-collar. I accidentally graduated from college.
That should be a
I'm
simple
blue-collar.
process.
See, my question kind of builds on your point. And this is this idea, this keeps coming up, is, what I wrote down here, do you keep dancing around the issue of explicit guidance? Okay, and, so I think in a lot of ways, so far, nobody's said anything really, I don't know, controversial for us. But once you start getting explicit guidance, then we, nobody said anything that would help guide institutions or teachers with explicit guidance for how to talk about these systems.
You mean enforceable?
Well,
Explicit guidance.
is that what it means?
I mean, I tell you, from my departments, the chaos that's currently in there, it would be nice if we could get finally some top-down enforceable pathway that is coherent for everybody to follow. We could do something. I mean, maybe that's controversial.
It's almost impossible to happen in your department.
I understand that. That's why it's so frustrating.
But in the ELC it could. So if we were going to do it in the ELC, what would we start with?
I'm having a hard time seeing it develop anywhere. I think it's really, explicit guidance is a better way to say it than enforceable, because you probably don't mean somebody's going to go on and enforce it. So explicit guidance is a good way to put it. But I'm struggling to see how my department, your department, any department that I personally know of could actually implement this.
So can I go back to what do you mean by explicit guidance? Because I understand at the moment we have statements. Right? You can put onto your syllabi some ideas, but they're not necessarily guidance. They're just, okay, if you use AI, you must help. Is that guidance? Or is that just a rule?
It's a rule.
Right. So I'm wondering how you're framing explicit guidance. The 15% here, when they say the simply offer explicit guidance, I think they offer explicit rules, but I don't think they offer any guidance. I would say the number's lower for guidance and higher for.
I think maybe you need to back up and talk about foundational teacher training and guiding students through from the beginning to the higher stages of usage and embedding critical thinking and grading the process. And these are things that can be explicitly written and shared.
Yeah.
But it's not easy, as we are finding out.
I kind of on topic, I think, but one thing I've really experienced a lot of in the past year is that there was some training going on at my university, and there was a lot of observations happening to make sure that teachers were implementing certain things. And I mean, in my office, I had a lot of people who were quite anti a lot of the things that were going on. So they'd made for their observed lessons, this all singing or dancing thing, and it is not reflected at all of their actual teaching style. And I feel with a lot of these policies, it's kind of doing the same thing, so that they'll bring something into that one lesson that they're being observed so that it can tick the checkbox, but they don't actually engage or believe it themselves, so they're doing it to perform.
1,000%.
Yeah, but what I'm advocating is if you're is it Sherman?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So last year, coming to the conference, being somewhat new at it, I mean, again, you're taking the first stages of what is AI, what's it all about, can I use it, I'm maybe slightly interested in it, I couldn't gauge, but you had some interest, you made it to the conference.
Curious.
So, yeah.
Well, I was curious last year,
Sure.
now I'm interested.
Sure, so you get that initial stage down. So implementing this, again, we can talk to a lot of teachers and say, put it in your syllabus, and they do. They have something explicit, but I don't know if it's guidance. A, because they probably are not complimenting it. And usage
This is what I mean by
Like
performance.
guidelines.
Yeah, and they have, but again, I'm not going to fault them because it's a new.
Yeah, A doesn't equal B.
Yeah, I mean, what is the expectation of the school? What is the expectation of the parents? I mean, all the different stakeholders say, hey,
Well,
use AI.
so that's why I was trying to emphasize the idea of like the shared vocabulary, that we could talk about what's going on in your class in terms of, now, Joe might not realize this, but Jason and I talked explicitly about that kind of the AI, like the framework that I talked about. But even when I talked to you about digital access, I'm using this vocabulary now because that's how I've come to think about that. That's evolved out of my teaching practices, and that's how I've come to talk about teaching. So that's sort of where I'm going with this, is that we need, if I was going to implement an AI policy discussion group in our department, one of the things I'd have to talk about is what when you're using your AI in the class, what do you think you're doing in terms of this vocabulary? Does that make sense?
Yeah. I mean, I'm okay with that. I'm not against you guys in a sense. I'm just saying, you know, when you say explicit guidance or enforceable ideas, as we already mentioned, we've got a lot of teachers, but this is